Welcome back, WNST, Taos of Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. There is nothing more positive about Baltimore than sitting here. Live lobster steamed. We've got steamed crabs, soft crabs, oysters, clams, beer, oyster facts, and Fadley Seafood. We're at Lexington Market, the old, I'd say the old market now, not quite the new market,
I'm
right?
telling you, but Alicia's running around over there, getting it ready to open this morning. It's a lot going on here.
Well, I tell you what, it's all brought to you by the Maryland Lottery. We're letting ourselves play. I've got Betty Boop scratch-off tickets that I'm going to be giving away to anybody here. You're getting one, mac and cheese coming to me. I got crab cakes. We got a long day today, and we got a lot of great guests, but we're going to start the day with a guy. Dude, you're like a little celebrity today. Ever since we put you on a show 4 years ago.
We take total responsibility.
Everything I have become is because of you two. All right, everything. My mom and dad are like lower down on the list.
You know what's true though? It's kicked in the first time we had your sister on. That's when things really turned around for you. So
yeah, she's always been the lead Vignarajah.
Who, by the way, we're with regular guest at Baltimore Positive, Thiru Vignarajah, President and CEO of Capital Plus Financial. Former partner at DLA Piper, one of the biggest law firms, and we're going to talk a little bit of law today because he clerked for somebody you might have heard of on the Supreme Court. But we always tease Thiru about his sister, also one of our favorite folks. But just as an aside, hadn't thought about it till Nestor said it, but she's doing, again, great work with the refugees coming out of the Ukraine. I mean, she is tireless, Thiru.
Right place, right time. We talk about refugees, right?
I mean, God, it is such an important issue, and she's really become one of the leading national voices on the refugee crisis. First, it was the Afghanistan refugee crisis. We already knew we had a crisis with respect to the southern border, and now the fallout of the war in Ukraine. I'm so proud of her. Look, she's been Vignarajah 2.0 for a long time. When I was a senior in high school, it was my year to shine. I was captain of the soccer team, the tennis team, and she was a little freshman. And first day of tennis practice, just to try to encourage her.
I don't have to ask who's older. I was going to say, I don't know which one of you is older. Go ahead.
So I'm a senior, she's a freshman. We do an exhibition match just to I'm trying to show people how good my sister. She whoops my.
She get a little Serena on you, did she?
6'1", 6'2", 100%. So she did. I almost quit tennis. I literally was like, this is my year. My little sister just. It was bad.
She got up for that one, huh?
Yeah.
She was ready. How are you, man?
I'm good.
I say get the papers and I see the news making some news here. See, Mueller's a political opera. He knows all these things before it hits the streets. We booked you on. I'm like, it'd be good to see Thiru. That's cool. I wonder if he's running for something. You're running for something.
I am. I'm running for state's attorney.
Well, make your play here because, we've sat here and talked to you about these issues and crime. And obviously, since the last – this whole thing got started with mayors going to jail. I told you that. That's why I got involved in all this, living in the city. I'm not a city resident anymore. I moved to the county about 2 months ago by accident. But you've been in on crime and in on all of this from the very beginning. And – I hear it now in the county and the city. I get around. Why here? Why now? And what makes you the answer? I guess
I have been fighting crime literally my whole life. It is the defining challenge that I have set myself to. That was true when I was a federal prosecutor. It was true when I was a city prosecutor leading major investigations. It was true when I was deputy attorney general, creating units and divisions dedicated to this problem of crime. And crime is the defining challenge of Baltimore. I don't need to tell anyone who's listening or paying attention to what's happening in the city how bad it has become, but let's just put these facts in context. 2,400 people have been killed on the streets of Baltimore over the past 7 years. We have 500 fewer police officers in the city than we did 7 years ago.
That's kind of amazing because he and I were up the street here. We went to the Hippodrome. We're going to talk to Dear Evan Hansen on the recon. But that's 2,500. That's the theater. Yeah. That's an amazing number.
And don't discount the 5,000 more that were shot and traumatized, left in a wheelchair.
Now we're filling up the arena. Yeah. Now that's unbelievable.
I will never forget Thiru. It's such an important point. I ran into Fred Bealfield, I want to say 7 or 8 years ago, so a long time ago. And Fred was out enjoying life in the private sector after doing what I think most people thought was a pretty darn good job as police commissioner. And one of the points that he made is the one that you just made. He said to me that night, he said, Don, don't forget, people only look at the homicides. They don't look at the number of shootings, because the number of shootings then lead to other homicides.
Or armed robberies that could be a shooting, where a gun is involved.
And that was a chilling point that Fred made.
I often have described it as gateway violence, right? They start with a robbery or a burglary. They don't get caught. Then they start carrying a gun during the robbery and the burglary, and they don't get caught.
Right.
They get caught, and the case gets dropped. They get caught, and they get time served. And they continue to escalate until doing a shooting and a killing is not a particularly daunting thing. It's not noteworthy in the gang life. It's not a significant feature because there's no risk of you getting caught. If you do get caught, there's no risk of you being effectively prosecuted. And the criminals pay attention to it. They know it. But I don't want to just put in context the past 7 years. Of course, that is the time that Madam State's Attorney has been leading that office. It is the worst 7 years in Baltimore history. I went and did the math. There's never been a 7-year period in Baltimore than at any point in Baltimore history. And last year was the worst per capita homicide rate in Baltimore history.
Now,
last year.
Wait, now stop there for a minute, and then I want you to go again, because I looked at some of your comments recently when you announced.
Yeah.
And two of the statistics that you referenced, I had to read twice because I thought, this just cannot be. And it was the fact that homicides this year are already up 20% over what you're describing from last year.
That's right.
And shootings are up 30%. Now, through that,
now, this is supposed to get worse in the summer, right? The winter, as a leader, you're always like, good weather breeds
you play
crime.
for a blizzard. Yes.
Look, weather has been our crime strategy.
You play for a blizzard.
We literally pray for snow as our approach to try to reduce violence. That's your only hope.
Right.
And so that's exactly. I appreciate you emphasizing this. Last year was the worst year in Baltimore history. Worse than the 80s, worse than the 90s, worse than when we were in the backdrop of The Wire or Homicide or... Last year was worse than all of those years. This year is 20% worse for homicides and 30% worse for shootings than last year. I mean, it's keep thinking you're going to hit rock bottom.
Are we getting 20 and 30% more guns on the street? Because I know that was our thing, guns on the street. Now, I guess where you are, that's a part of this, but now it's prosecution and catching the people that are actually doing
this. No, candidly, right? I'm not even going to waste time on all of the political talking points that people talk about. Of course we have to engage in gun control. Of course gun traffickers are a terrible problem. Of course ghost guns are a terrible problem. But you know what we actually need to do? We need to find and arrest the people that are committing crimes and prosecute them effectively. It's that simple. And if we were doing that the way we were doing it 10 years ago when we had murders below 200, we would not be in this moment of crisis today, but we stopped. We stopped our approach when it comes to arrests. We stopped our approach when it came to prosecutions. Politicians took over the prosecutor's office, and the results have been harrowing. I, in many ways, am torn about what to do about the city because there is root causes and systematic change that needs to happen. But before you start getting to those problems, you have to address the problem of crime. You know, our benches, you've seen them, it says Baltimore is the greatest city in America. We just have to face facts. Baltimore is not the greatest city in America anymore. It can be, but the biggest problem is crime. We have to overcome that problem if we're going to start turning to the other engines of progress. You can't recruit businesses. You can't keep families here. You can't tell people about the extraordinary institutions that we have in Baltimore that call Baltimore home unless you address the problem and perception of crime. Because right now what they hear, most violent city in America. They get a headline at the end of USA Today's year in review that says Baltimore is the murder capital of the country again.
And all this does is support that Wire narrative.
Correct. Correct. We had the most popular show in HBO history give us a good sense of what Baltimore was, and then we made things worse.
Well, we're about to go through
it again with the TV
I was just going to say,
out, right.
We're about on April the 25th.
Yeah.
You know, good friends of our show, Justin Fenton, Bill Zorsi. We're looking forward to having David Simon on soon. But We Own This City is coming back out. And again, the horror of the Gun Trace Task Force is going to be front and center. So I think you make a number of interesting points. Number one, we always preface it by saying that we're fond of the mayor. And I know you're fond of the mayor. And we think that the mayor, for example's heart is really in the right place. But I was struck this week. that Michael, and I haven't spoken to Michael yet, and Michael Olesker's coming on the show soon. Michael Olesker wrote an article, and you probably saw it, where he basically chastised city leaders for saying we've got a new strategy. It's called Surrender, Dorothy, basically. And he was just, for Olesker, who's as city a guy as a city a guy as a city a guy can be, said our strategy appears to be surrender, Dorothy.
Yeah, it's never worked that way. And if you really did understand the streets of Baltimore, you would understand that it will never work that way. I mean, they understand, the criminal element understands that there are incentives. They're in the business of crime. They're in the business of drug dealing. And when the cost of business goes up, it gets a little bit harder. They're a little bit more deterred. And if the cost of business goes down and you can shoot and kill without consequence, you talk about these clearance rates. The clearance rate is a fictionalized industry term. It does not tell you the number that people actually care about.
Well, you've been on that train for several years.
How many people are being arrested for the murders that are being committed, and how many of those arrests are leading to successful prosecutions? That's the only thing anybody should care about.
Through back up. This is one of my. This is where we love Baltimore Positive, and we think of our audiences as a community where we all try. Nestor's term is all the time. We try to get smarter.
There's not one person that ever hears my voice in any context.
We try to get
that doesn't care about Baltimore.
Right.
That's the glue. And I realized that when I rebranded 2 years ago. I'm like, what do we all have in common when sports is shut down or pandemic? We need this place to be better. This is the economic engine of the whole state.
And you always talk about us trying to get smarter. So I want you to back up for a minute, play that tape back, and tell folks why the clearance rates that are reported, that are already dismal, why they're even more dismal. Explain it to them. Like they're a 3-year-old.
Like me. Explain it to me.
No, Nestor? No one should be proud of a 50% clearance rate, but let's be clear what a clearance rate is. A clearance rate is how many people, out of 100 murders, how many people did you arrest for those murders? Okay, that makes sense. So 20% got arrested out of the 100 murders.
Let's do the math.
That's good. Okay. So you got 100 murders, 20 people got arrested. Your clearance rate is at 20%. Now, how many people that were suspects in murders got killed, and therefore that case is not solvable because, let's say 20 more of the suspects got killed. Your clearance rate just went from 20% to 40%. By the way, last year's murders, 10 suspects in last year's murders also got killed this year. You get 10 more for this year. You just went from 20% to 50% because the people getting killed who are suspects in last year's murders or this year's murders adds to your clearance rate. The number you really care about, tell me if I'm wrong, is of the 100 people that got killed last year, how many people got arrested for those murders, right? That's the number you care about.
Arrested, and then I want to ask you, is it because it's your new job opportunity, convicted?
Correct. And the good news, and look, I'm going to call out Marilyn Mosby on any number of things. The good news is on the cases that are charged in the homicide division, most of those go to trial. Most of those result in a reasonable plea. That's not the rate limiting step there. 80, 90% of those cases get a good result. The problem is for shootings, carjackings, robberies, gun cases, the drop rate is massive. 30, 40% of cases that are charged are dropped by Marilyn Mosby's office. The remainder of those cases are pled out to time-served sentences. And then the handful that go to trial that are not homicides, they're losing 2/3 to 3/4 of those cases. So you got to distinguish, actually, the Mosby performance when it comes to homicides. And why? She knows people pay attention to those cases. Those cases are carefully reviewed, carefully looked at, prosecuted by
she's prosecuted one guy 5 times, right? So
yeah. And look, the homicide cases she takes quite seriously. The problem is all those gateway violence crimes, the guns, the robberies, the burglaries, the shootings, the carjackings, those cases are being systematically dropped and ignored. Remember Luther Trent?
How is that possible? Somebody could carjack my wife at the corner of Charles Street and not go to jail. How is that? Like, to me,
it seems like a fair question.
Yeah, and for jail for a long time. To me,
let me give you a hypothetical. Imagine somebody came to your girlfriend's home in the middle of the night, poured gasoline all over the house, and lit it on fire with her and 2 roommates inside, and got charged with 3 counts of attempted murder and arson. Imagine that person going home after 6 months with a time-served sentence. That happened. That happened, and Luther Trent went on national television and said, I should be in jail right now. That was an unreasonable plea. When the defendants know that they're getting a slap on the wrist, you know you've got a problem.
Well, the perception, the reality's bad enough, but the perception of folks in the county is they've stopped policing down here, and that's okay with her. That's okay with her. We've invited her on. Apparently, she's busy. We've been doing this for 4 years. There's only been a handful of people that have ducked us. There aren't many people that. I mean, Uncle Larry didn't duck us. Jack, when he's running the city for 3 weeks, nobody ducked us. She has ducked us. So I really don't know. I don't know much about her. I don't have a feel.
And we've reached out just to be clear.
Answer these questions as to what the reality versus what a business owner in Fells Point has to deal with on a Saturday night. Not about shootings, not about prostitution, about people urinating on their business, about them selling beer out in the middle of the street, and then just saying that's not a prosecutable. Like, at some point, common sense has to be that you can't do these things.
I want to pick up on that because there was, and it did not get much ink. It got maybe a sentence or two in the coverage of your announcement. Nestor alludes to something that may or may not be significant, and I need you to weigh in on it. Perception, here's where we make a mistake, and I'm going to call you the market man because you and I visited some markets recently, and I'm going to talk about what I saw. But I think we make a mistake when we think this perception is only beyond city lines because I think it exists in the city as well. The perception being that State's Attorney Mosby's decision to not prosecute certain crimes has emboldened and created a criminal culture within the city of Baltimore. You were asked that by reporters on the day of your announcement, and without specifics, you said it's a, quote me if I'm wrong, a complicated issue, but you are prepared to roll some of that back. So what does that mean?
And, you know, in the soundbite this is the reason why I love these interviews. In the soundbite context, you don't want to get misquoted, right? Look, should we be prosecuting loitering and trespass every time those cases come into court? Of course not. We got to use our judgment. We got to marshal our resources. So when Marilyn Mosby says, I'm going to stop prosecuting loitering and trespass, I hope that we're not spending time prosecuting and loitering trespass. I hope that was true under Greg Bernstein. I hope that was true under Patricia Jessamy. Now, if you go and announce to the world that you're no longer prosecuting possession cases, public urination cases, prostitution cases, that's a problem. Because now the criminal element knows that they can walk down the street selling drugs, pissing wherever they want, engaging in prostitution and solicitation, and that there are no consequences for that. Because after Ms. Mosby did it, Brandon Scott and the police commissioner said, fine, we agree. We're throwing in the towel. We're not making arrests. The combination of that is a huge mistake. Am I going to prosecute every solicitation case? Of course not. We have to be responsible about where we are shepherding our resources. But sometimes you've got to make those arrests and pursue those prosecutions because that's how you get to the bigger cases. That's how you work yourself up the chain to the drug kingpins, to the shooters and killers.
Well, then we say we're arresting too many people. Then that becomes a race issue in our city over the course of history, right? A jail issue. How many people can you put in jail for pissing on a business or whatever these things that are, I don't want to say victimless because that's a bad thing, but things that are not violent, that things that don't involve a gun or involve a robbery or a threat of some way.
Nestor, we have to be really honest about this. We did arrest too many people. We did arrest too many people for a long time. We thought that locking up everyone on a corner was a good strategy to send a message, and it wasn't. That was a colossal failure. We arrested 100,000 people, and the consequence of that we're still living with.
Well, a generation later, we don't have jobs and people that can
get
exactly
jobs.
Right.
So 100,000 was too high. 10,000 is too low. There is some
I feel like the baby bear,
number.
right? We're looking for Goldilocks.
Look, what are you trying to do? You're trying to get people that are violent repeat offenders off the streets and in prison, okay? You're committing carjackings, you're doing shootings, you're doing serial murders. You need to be taken off the streets, effectively and justly prosecuted, and put behind bars. Then there are people that need help. They're victims of addiction. They're victims of trafficking. Well, some of the arrests are useful because you actually give them a chance to be before a judge, to be before a probation officer that can connect them with the resources that what they need. And then there are some petty offenses that we don't want to marshal all of our resources to, but you also can't pretend they're not a crime anymore. Legislators make the laws. You don't, as state's attorney, get to say, I don't like that law, I'm not going to enforce it. Oh, I don't like bribery in City Hall. It's not a big deal. It happens everywhere. We're not going to waste our resources on it. And by the way, if it was true that those resources were being transferred from those petty offenses to the carjackings and the shootings and the murders, maybe we could have a more serious debate. If you've only got 15 prosecutors and you got 150 murders, maybe you need every one of those prosecutors for the murders. But that's not what they're doing. The murder prosecutions aren't getting better. The carjacking and shooting prosecutions aren't getting better. All you've done is emboldened the criminal element and also told the people that are being prosecuted, well, we're still going to give you a slap on the wrist plea deal, and as long as you didn't kill someone, you probably can get away with it. That's a terrible message.
How does that change if you're Attorney General or anybody like you to push that down? Whether you win or she might not run, and we can talk about all. Yeah. There probably will be someone new given her situation, right? Yeah. Whether it's you, how does that get pushed down from the top to come in when this thing has slid, as you pointed out through Jessica, a whole bunch of people? It's slid to this point. How do you make that institutional change if you're elected?
Let's be really specific, really specific. Right now, we dropped 40% of felony cases in the Baltimore City Circuit Court. That doesn't mean you got arrested, but then the prosecutor reviewed it and didn't like
felonies.
These are felonies. Felonies.
This is serious.
Circuit court cases. What it means is somebody got arrested for a crime, carjacking, robbery, a burglary. It went to the grand jury and a prosecutor indicted the person, and then 6 months later, on average, 40% of those cases are being dropped. That's a problem. The first thing that we would do is
we know the crime happened.
We know the crime happened, and the prosecutor believed it was a sufficiently strong case to put before the grand jury. The problem is they don't do what I did when I was a city prosecutor. They don't do what I did when I was a federal prosecutor, which is called pre-indictment review. Before you review the case, you make sure you've talked to the officers, you don't see any constitutional problems, and once you've reviewed and approved that case and the person is indicted, the schedule is set. That case ain't being dropped unless something dramatic changes. Sometimes things change dramatically, right? A new witness comes forward and says, actually, he was with me, that he has a solid alibi. The law changes, and a motion is going to be successful, so you got to drop the case. Things do change, but in the federal system where I grew up, I started as a federal prosecutor. Once you indicted the case because you got your supervisor's approval, you need to get your supervisor's approval also to drop the case. So there is momentum to those cases.
Well, if you're federally indicted, your ass is in a sling. Am I right? I mean, what do
they say? 95% cases plead out. 98% of the cases that remain go to trial and result in a conviction.
You're probably guilty or going to be found guilty if the feds are going to put this much effort on it, right?
And they do the work in advance, but it's not just that.
And 40% of that's getting dropped?
Yeah. In Baltimore City.
Nestor,
what does that say to the victims?
Well,
what does that say to the person that got carjacked, to the person that got robbed?
And I'm talking about this case partly because I was involved. I'm talking about this case because the public knows a lot of the facts. That Luther Trent defendant, who in the middle of the night, he admitted it, right? He literally went on television and said, yeah, I went and poured gaseline. It was a Romeo and Juliet situation. If I couldn't have her, no one could. He said all those things. Nobody's disputing that he did this. The victims didn't learn until the night before that the defendant was going to get a time-served sentence. One of them went apoplectic. She was so upset. She called the roommate, the other roommate, who hadn't heard about it at all until the morning of the plea, and she got upset about it. The third third victim never even got a call. That was for a first-degree attempted murder and arson case. You think the carjacking victims...
You'd be insane.
You think the burglary case victims...
You'd be insane.
Well, they're not even getting a call.
You know what, man? I hate injustice in that way. Like, it really pisses me off. You know, let alone watching this war happen every day. But we have our own war in the city. Thiru Vignarajah is here. I want to break real quick.
I would say I think it's a great. We've got so much.
Kind of smell crab cakes too.
I smell the crab cakes.
I literally just got. I see. There's the first one coming out right there.
Alicia's got a big smile on her face.
Alicia's cranking the crab cakes. Perfect time to take.
It's too early in the morning. No, it's not.
We are with Thiru Vignarajah running for state's attorney. When we come back, I'm going to ask Thiru why I've nicknamed him the market man. We'll be back.
All of these wise conversations brought to you by friends at the Maryland Lottery and our friends at Goodwill. I had Lisa Rosiniak on from Goodwill this week talking about jobs, something I know that we can all agree on. I'm giving Betty Boop lottery tickets away. We're here. We're doing a whole month of shows throughout the city. Greenmount Station, going to be at G&A Coney Island, Hot Dog in the new location up in White Marsh, as well as back with our friends at Nacho Mamas.
Does Alicia get a Betty Boop?
She gets 2 Betty Boops.
All right,
well, there's
two Betty Boops for
2 Betty
Alicia.
Boops for you, pink and blue. I'm Nestor. We are WNST. Back for more with Thiru Vignarajah. We're live at Fadley's in the old Lexington Market, soon to be the new Lexington Market, and soon to be in Catonsville.